Steve Gardner, a good friend from USA Today, kind enough to join us on the Boardwalk Hunt hotline on a Tuesday. Steve, how you been, pal?
I'm good, Rich. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Always good to finally put a bow on everything. And let's start with a little hot stove. I know the two big names out there, Machado and Harper. All of a sudden now, the Philadelphia Phillies, as we've kind of known, their names are always going to be in the mix here. But I think this is a critical offseason for the Phillies. And I do believe they're going to throw their hat in the ring. The question is, are they really willing to spend? I think that's the question. If you're a Phillies fan, you got to ask yourself, is this organization really going to spend on one or both of those players?
I think they're willing. The question is, who else is willing? And is Bryce Harper or is Manny Machado going to consider Philly in the same breath with some of the other teams that have an awful lot of money to spend? So that's really the question. I think right now, Bryce Harper and Manny Machado both have earned the right to pick where they want to go, which means what they want in a team, whether it's competitive, in addition to other things other than just who's going to offer them the most money, because you and I both know, Rich, they're going to get paid an awful lot no matter where they go. So now at this point, it's a matter of picking which team they want to play for.
Yeah, I also think the one thing I believe the Phillies are going to do is really play this close to the vest. I mean, and you also know this time of year things change in a New York second. I mean, last offseason, I remember they were kind of lukewarm on the idea of signing Arrieta, and he was looking at that 5+ year deal, right? And then a couple months later, again, it's Middleton. They're going to Clearwater, and he's locked up a 3-year deal. So things change. I went back and I listened and I read some of the transcripts and some of the comments from Matt Klintak over the last couple months, and he's not locked in one way to improve the club this winter. So I think there's some scenarios where they might go pitching, but I also think there's some scenarios where he's going to look for an extra bat. And I think we saw some of the pitchers going to be out there, the Keuchel, the Haps. There's going to be a market for pitching as well.
Yeah, indeed. And that's the one thing, too, that in this market, they're the two top free agents that we talk about an awful lot, but there's some decent players that can be difference makers further on down on the list, with the Patrick Corbins you mentioned, Jay Happ, Craig Kimbrell, Keuchel, guys like that. So, yeah, I think it's probably in every team's best interest, to tell you the truth, to play it kind of close to the vest. We'll see maybe some posturing at the GM meetings, and then once the winter meetings kick in next month, then that's when we could start seeing some signings. I would think, not to handicap this at all, because anything I say will probably be wrong, but I would think that the two marquee names will probably wait a while to get their best deal and not want to be the first one to sign, so that if you wait and somebody else, the other guy signs, then you have a little bit more leverage. I would expect, maybe a Patrick Corbin or somebody like that to be an icebreaker and sign early. But most of the players, I think, will wait a while.
How about even a guy like Sonny Gray? I mean, look, at the end of the day, there are teams out there that need a starter that's going to eat up a ton of innings, maybe get you 130 to 140 innings, and maybe at the end of the day, 12-11, 13-10 with a 3.3 ERA. So it's like, again, I don't discount any of these names out there. I do believe the Phillies have to upgrade in their starting rotation. I do. I really do. And quite frankly, I'm still not sold on the bullpen, their middle relief, but I also think they need another bat. I mean, you mentioned there's so many teams that are going to be vying for some of these other player services. It does come down to the teams, though, as you alluded to, that really make the most sense, right? It's numbers, it's dollars, but again, it's what makes the most sense.
Yep, exactly. And I think it starts with somebody like Machado. You look at where does he make sense? The Yankees seem to want him, but I'll tell you what. I was having this discussion over the weekend with a couple of baseball writer friends of mine, and the question about Manny Machado, for instance, is, would he be willing to go to New York and play third base? Or would he rather sign somewhere else and maybe not be in that, huge spotlight and play shortstop for, a 10-year contract or for essentially the rest of his career? That's a really interesting decision, and got a lot of different points of view on that. I personally think that he wants to play shortstop, and if he wants to do that, then Philadelphia is, in my mind, the best place for him to go, or the most logical place for him to go. But if he's willing to play third base and go for the big name, then the Yankees would be definitely the place for him. So that's one of the more interesting kind of storylines throughout this free agent period for him.
Yeah, no. I agree. I think he wants to play short. I just don't. I've seen too many red flags with him. Listen, he's a hell of a player and he's in his prime, but I'm telling you, I just don't know. Listen, he's 26. He plays stellar defense at a premium position, right? We know that. And since he's been in the big leagues, he puts up these monster numbers. He hits for average. He's a superstar. But, man, you really have to peel back some layers here before you offer him up, say, a $300 million contract. I mean, you really do.
Sure. And I think what we'll see, too, with a lot of these free agents is it won't be, the long-term contract without any escape clauses, opt-outs, or things like that. I think that's what players are demanding these days. So even if you have a bad fit, you can at least buy your way out of it, perhaps. You'll have to pay a nice chunk of change to trade a guy while he's under a long-term contract, but at least there's the possibility of that. So I would say whatever team, especially a team that is not really 100% sold on a Manny Machado, I would expect for some of those out clauses and opt-outs and all of that to be an essential part of it.
All right, I want to get into a couple things with the Hall of Fame, and then we'll do a little more on the off-season winner next week. But I saw the ballot with some of these players and their names. So you've got the 6 former major leaguers, 3 managers, 1 executive. They're going to comprise the 10-name today's era ballot, right? And we'll get that decision December 9th. You've got Baines, Albert Bell, Carter Clark, Hershiser. And Lee Smith. I'll stick with the players first before, even Davey Johnson / player manager, Charlie Manuel, Lou Piniella, and Steinbrenner. Out of these players that I just mentioned, 2 that stand out that I believe you can make a really strong case. First of all, I think Albert Bell is a Hall of Famer. I understand Albert Bell did not get along with the media, but and it tells you something. The year that he hits 38 home runs and drives in 129, and I think his batting average was about 290, 295. His slugging was well over 500. He finishes 7th in the MVP race. I get it. He didn't get along with the media. He wasn't a good guy. But there's no way someone can tell me that for a 5, 6, 7 year stretch, he wasn't the best player in baseball.
Well, I think you're right about that. The question is, though, that 5 consecutive All-Star seasons there with the Indians and 1 with the White Sox. Yeah, he was. But when we talk about Hall of Fame players, and I think this is why he didn't get a whole lot of consideration with the Baseball Writers Association, is, yes, he didn't get along with a lot of members, but the fact that his career was condensed into that kind of a short peak, and there wasn't that longevity. After the injury, really that cost him at the end of his career, he was gone by the age of 33. And a lot of the guys that you talk about building up Hall of Fame careers, they're in the game for a lot longer than that. And I think that's where it took him a while to break into the major leagues, and then he had the dominant portion, and then he just sort of faded off. I think that's probably what the biggest sticking point for Albert Bell is, and why he didn't get much traction with the writers.
I go 600, close to 600 games, 12 seasons, high level, 5 All-Stars, 5 Silver Slugger awards, 3 consecutive top 3 MVP finishes, and then you look at his 139, I guess they use it WRC plus, right? The career WRC plus, 70th in Major League history. I think Reggie Jackson, Duke Snider, among others, posted 8 30 home run seasons, 9 100 RBI seasons. I think it's because he did not get along with the media and people deemed him as a bad guy. And he wasn't the most pleasant guy, but it's funny. You're saying the longevity has to be there. But I also think sometimes it can hurt a player, like Harold Baines. Harold Baines had a long career, but to me he was also somewhat of a compiler, was he not?
Yeah, that's true, and he never was, in that MVP consideration every year, as you could say Albert Bell was. I just look at the career totals, and I'm looking at it right now. Bell had, in an era where, we kind of sniff at guys with 400 and even 500 home runs. That's not enough for some. He had 381 in his career. And you look at that career home run total, and you're like, wow, that doesn't really stack up with the greats of all time. So he's an interesting case for sure. And some guys that the media didn't like have made it in. Jim Rice was one guy in particular that was kind of a borderline case, but he finally made it. So yeah, I think Bell did not do his candidacy any favors by the way he acted with the media, but in this case, I think it's justified to say he's definitely in the Hall of Very Good.
How about Oral Hershiser? Early, again, he had two career arcs, if you will. I mean, obviously, you go back to the mid-'80s, and he had the ridiculous year in '88 when he was 23-8, Cy Young, MVP, finished, I think, 5th or 6th, top 5 Cy Young awards. But then really the second arc of his career, he wasn't nearly the same pitcher, but there was also that 4, 5, 6 year stretch where he was one of the best in baseball.
Again, yeah, exactly, and he got to 200 wins.
Yes, 204.
So that's a plus in his feather in his cap. I think we look at maybe Hershiser and Joe Carter, who's also on this ballot, as guys who had signature moments, and maybe the length of their career was not, they were not excellent throughout their entire career, and they did maybe compile a little bit better stats for their careers than Albert Bell did. But again, I don't know. Is it just that we think of Hershiser like we think of, for Jack Morris, for instance, who got in with the Veterans Committee last time? There's that signature moment.
Yeah.
But was he really one of the best pitchers in baseball for an awful long time? I'd say he's on the borderline there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because you look at the postseason. Quickly, what about Lee Smith?
I'll tell you, Rich. When he was on the writers' ballot, it was kind of a thing where you look at a guy who's certainly longevity was in Lee Smith's favor, but in terms of relief pitchers, I think their role is so specialized. You have to be super dominant, in my mind, and that's why you'll have a Gossage, you'll have an Eckersley, but Lee Smith, I think, was not that super dominant all the time. And I think he comes very close to the line, but falls short, which is kind of a theme with these guys.
All right, a minute plus on each of these last two. Steinbrenner, I think eventually he gets in. I mean, I know we forget that he was basically admonished from baseball for a couple seasons, but I mean, I just think it's kind of the time for George. And then I'm curious your thoughts on Charlie Manuel.
Well, for Steinbrenner, I think you're right that there are some very good things that he did. There's some very bad things that he did. But ultimately, you can't really write the story of baseball throughout the 70s and 80s without George Steinbrenner being a huge part of it. So I think of all the candidates on the ballot, maybe George Steinbrenner, to me, deserves to get in if anybody does. And I think, too, some of the guys that have been left off the ballot, Marvin Miller of the Players Association, a longtime antagonist of baseball owners like Steinbrenner, certainly deserves to be in there too, because again, that's part of the baseball story. So it would seem to me to be justice to have both of those guys in. And Charlie Manuel, I think the world of Charlie Manuel, and in his capacity with a couple of different franchises. He certainly is a let's say, a worthwhile candidate. I don't know if he will get the success. Maybe he's underappreciated, because he's not one of those flamboyant, the anti-Steinbrenner, if you will, in terms of personality, and very underrated. I wonder if that will maybe be a detriment to him, but certainly he's a deserving candidate. I have nothing bad to say, and certainly the players that have played under him I don't think I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Charlie Manuel.
And then Davey Johnson, close to 1,400 career wins, 562 winning percentage, and then also Lou Piniella as well.
Yeah, Davey Johnson, again, I think he's on the ballot because of his managerial career,
yes,
more so than his playing career. Heck of a manager, and the end in Washington was kind of sad because it seemed like he sort of checked out on the team, or the team checked out on him. I think, again, very, very good, but I don't think I would put him as one of the all-time great managers. Same with Lou Piniella, longevity for sure, and a fine playing career. I would say that he may be the best of the players that we've talked about who've also gone into managing. But again, very, very good. I don't know though if either one of them is deserving of getting into the Hall, at least in my version of the Hall of Fame.
All right. Always appreciate the insight. We will talk next week. We'll talk a little more hot stove. We'll go around the league as always. Appreciate a couple moments, Steve.
Sounds good, Rich. Thanks so much.
You got to be well. Steve Gardner from USA Today, Boardwalk on the Hotline.